I first started doing global service learning in 1994, and it had a huge impact on me as an educator. And I ended up doing my PhD in that area as well, so I had an opportunity to create a program and then study while I was still working on this program as a sort of theorist practitioner, see how theory and practice inform each other. And over those years, sort of a framework has emerged in how I think about it. So there's 4 dimensions to this, and you can track these dimensions through practice and research and theory. So it's kind of nice. And so when you look at the field, you'll see these 4 dimensions emerging, but they've taken place at different times, and different people focus on different dimensions depending on their interest. And my argument is you should think about the integration of those 4 dimensions. So the 4 dimensions are pedagogy, research, community development, and institutional change. And so typically when a faculty member and educator is thinking about global service learning or service learning, they think about it in terms of pedagogy, the teaching and learning process. And so one of the key concepts and dimensions of pedagogy is reflection. And so there's been a lot of research and conversation in the field about the theory and practice of how to do good reflection to ensure that students learn from the experience, from the service learning experience. And there are weak and robust versions of good pedagogical models. And so you'll find a good service learning program, whether it's global or local, has fairly robust reflection activities. They're structured, they're intentional, there's multiple forms of feedback. They connect the experience of the service to the learning. So now, there's a big focus on getting undergraduates and graduate students have always been required to do research. So undergraduates are also doing much more research, and service learning is a great opportunity to conduct research. So faculty are doing research abroad. So one way to incorporate service learning into their course is they could have different research activities. Faculty, students, and community members could work together to conduct more robust versions of research to address certain problems that have been identified by the community in collaboration with the faculty and the students and other partners. And so there's a huge conversation in the global service learning and service learning field on what constitutes quality research when you're conducting service learning. And there are folks that focus on pedagogy and there are folks that focus on research. Sometimes they don't talk to each other. And then the third dimension is institutional change. So a lot of folks here at the Institute are very interested in how they can create support structures within the institution to foster more robust service learning. And there's lots of research on institutional support structures and robust institutional frameworks for doing service learning. But again, not all those folks are doing the practice and the teaching and learning or thinking about different forms of research, but they're thinking, and often they're deans, they're high-level administrators, they're faculty who have done service learning that move on to higher-level positions so they can actually influence policy. So a faculty member who starts with a course and says, wow, there are limitations to teaching a couple of courses. Maybe there are implications for my department, for our curriculum, for our college, for my field. So maybe we should be thinking about resources and policies within the field or the institution that will impact and help foster more robust global service learning, right? And the last dimension, which is probably the most neglected dimension in the literature, is when you hear people say, what about the community, right? And so how do we collaborate? How do we build partnerships with community members? And that's the community development piece. And there's really rich theory and practice around community development, particularly in the international development field, that hasn't really reached the service learning field very much. There aren't a lot of good theories and frameworks that we're drawing from. There's some pretty decent domestic ones, like you might have heard of asset-based community development, where you think about community assets along with sort of their needs, and so shifting out of a deficit model. So my argument when I do institutes or workshops around global service learning or local service learning is I try to get people to think about these 4 dimensions and the strengths and limitations and the weak and robust forms of each of those dimensions when you're thinking about a comprehensive integrated approach to local and global service learning. A lot of the research that I've conducted over the years, so I teach learning theory, and so I'm very interested in learning outcomes. And this longitudinal study I conducted as part of my dissertation was on learning outcomes. And I found that there were, at least in the study that I reported and published, there were 6. Intellectual, moral, political, personal, cultural, and spiritual. And I worked with students over time, over an 8-year period, and it's actually still continuing the study to kind of track patterns in that type of learning, spiritual learning, cross-cultural learning, intellectual learning, how much they're aware of things happening around them in different contexts, and how that influences their learning and their ability to communicate in a sensitive way. So I did, identify some of those learning outcomes, but typically you'll hear about, in most service learning studies, you'll hear personal growth, civic outcomes, and academic outcomes. Global service learning shifts it a little bit because if you think about civic learning, there's a great model out there, Westheimer, about personally responsible citizenship, participatory citizenship, and social justice citizenship, and they have wonderful concepts embedded within each of those types of citizenship, but there's not a global dimension. And so now you hear a lot about global citizenship, and the model I just described with those 6 learning outcomes, there's actually 2 more that I identified. There's social and emotional learning and social learning, how to communicate more effectively across cultures and different languages, and nonverbal and verbal forms of communication. And global citizenship, you could look at global citizenship as encompassing those 8 learning outcomes, which is a pretty substantial set of knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors, right? So KSABs, I like to call them. And if you throw KSABs at each of those 8 domains, that's a lot of learning. Typically you'll hear things like intercultural competence. So there's a lot of, there's some really good models out there, Deardorff, Hunter, global competence. Deardorff looked at intercultural competence and found that there are cognitive, affective, and behavioral domains to intercultural competence. So I shoot for the 8 different outcomes typically when I think about what it means to develop a global consciousness. And some people frame that in terms of citizenship. I like to expand it beyond citizenship and call it critical global engagement. There aren't that many models, so more recently one of the first research volumes in international service learning, global service learning came out, and it was edited by Robert Bringle, Julie Hatcher, and Steve Jones. And it came out last year, and it was an attempt to kind of document, find out what kind of research people have been doing on assessing the impact. There aren't that many examples out there. It's an emerging field, so one example I think that I can speak to personally was a program that I developed at a community college, Hopkins Cornell Community College, with another faculty member. It's in its 17th year, and we found there are 3 really important pieces to the sustainability of that partnership. Commitment, so a long-term commitment. Collaboration, a commitment to including as many stakeholders as possible in the planning process throughout the program. And commitment, collaboration, and connections. And so we have spent years developing a vast network of people that are interested in focusing on healthcare and healthcare issues in Nicaragua. And so those 3 C's are key to really sustainable partnerships. And given that the program's in its 17th year, we're really proud of that because we thought very concretely about what it meant to be committed, what it meant to collaborate, and what it meant to develop connections that were not only local within Nicaragua, regional, national, and then international. So, with multiple stakeholders, government, nonprofit, higher education institutions, community, neighborhoods, and communities. Within that, we focus on problems first. So, what knowledge do we need to apply to this particular health situation? And it could be, I have a political science, education, history, cross-cultural learning background. My partner, who I helped develop the course with, has a health background. She's also a therapist. So she was very concerned about mental health along with public health issues. And over time, we met lots of other folks from different disciplines that could help us understand locally and within our own institution and other institutions. So also historians in the region that we were at, they helped teach the courses. Politicians and decision makers, the health minister would help teach our courses. So community activists, local herbalists, so we had lots of people help develop the curriculum and participate in the teaching and learning process and the research process.